Cool. So we've got Catherine here. Catherine's a strength and conditioning coach with the Space Force currently, but kind of a long and pretty impressive career in the field. Catherine, I was hoping you could just start us off with maybe some brief overview of your career progression thus far, because you've been all over the place.
Awesome. Thanks, Charlie. So I'm Catherine. I've been a tactical strength coach now for over 10 years. Really was able to jump into this field at the right time when tactical strength conditioning was just kind of making an appearance. So started off right out of college working with the Marine Corps. And so that kind of shifted me around a little bit on the East Coast, working at both Beaufort and Camp Lejeune. So got to experience lots of different styles of Marine Corps training and what they need, and really grew and learned a lot very, very fast because Marines are not the most forgiving bunch, which was great. That really launched me into transitioning down to Florida for a bit, working with the Navy over in Mayport. So from there, very different setup, working with sailors that are on and off ships, constantly deploying and limited space and what health and just overall wellness really looks like. And then did some short contracts with the Army, really before H2F was a thing. They were kind of dabbling with the idea of it, and we were kind of testing some theories. That brought me up to Dover, Delaware, where I worked with the Air Force and started kind of working with the operational support team when that first kind of became a thing as well. So setting up a small human performance team there. I did a stint out in Arkansas, which was a little bit of a pivot as well, where helped kind of integrate and start the University of Health and Performance, which is a veteran and active duty university all around, just getting all the students and members that are passing through either certified somewhere in the health and wellness field, strength and conditioning, or being able to train them in a way that they're taking a lot of smart training tools and tactics back to their units or squadrons. And then had the opportunity to transition over to the Space Force because they don't really have any standards quite yet as to what training looks like. And so I was asked to come down to Florida and start dabbling, creating data, and tracking what their job is and what physical requirements are even needed for this kind of different and unique force within the military. So that's long-winded answer to kind of where I've transitioned and kind of bounced around so much over the past couple of years.
How's the experience been working with different branches of the military since you've been around? I think you're probably pretty individual in that regard. How has that experience been? Differences between the branches, how they approach strength and conditioning needs, all that good stuff.
Great question. So initially I thought like this will be seamless. It's the military, everybody has similar standards. And while it might look a little bit different as to what that's asked, it should be the same. And I was wildly wrong in that. You have different cultures and needs just going from squadron to squadron or from brigade to brigade. It transitions wildly. As a coach and as really just a civilian in general walking into the world, you really have to do your research. And even with the amount of research that you do with who you're working with and what their needs might be, biggest thing that you have to do is understand the people by getting to know them, stepping into their world, and just hoping that they trust you enough to be welcomed in and to give you kind of that patience to learn where they're coming from and what their needs are. So when it comes to physical training standards, they shift wildly. So in Beaufort, I was working with a lot of drill instructors that, we were doing a lot of rehab mechanics with them. So I was kind of working with them after they were done with physical therapy and athletic training and getting them back into the full swing of, okay, you've got a couple weeks off. How do we get you back on that next 3-month cycle when you're running through another boot camp series? So learning to understand how can we get them, in the top tier shape when it comes to like strength and power that they were needing, because they're constantly sprinting around and doing all those things without breaking down their bodies. So that was a very, very different approach to when I went over to Lejeune. Worked with a lot of different populations out there. We kind of saw a really big mix in our facility. So, Marines are they want to get after it. There's that tenacity. There's a lot of quick buy-in when it comes to physical readiness in both Marines and leadership, because that's just such a prioritization. So it was really, really great working with them, very exciting. Now, when I transitioned, let's say, over to the Air Force, I came in kind of hot and heavy and aggressive. And this is not a knock on the Air Force at all, but they were like, you got to pump the brakes. This is not what we do here.
Yeah.
So it was very much, okay, well, I understand what your test is. I understand what your roles are to an extent. Like, why aren't we pushing for this more? And they're like, well, why would we? And that made me really take a step back as to like, you're right. What are the other demands of your job? What do we need to prioritize? And that caused a lot of conversations that I need to have with leadership as to like, what do you want in your airmen? How do you see, their performance, and what does wellness or like readiness look like to you? And that's very different within each branch. We're in an interesting phase right now as well, where we haven't been at war in a long time. And so what readiness or physical demands are looking like for other branches changes and has shifted drastically. Because when I first entered, we still had lots of deployments and things going on, and it's kind of come to a halt. So the needs and tasks to be met really come and stem from conversations from both the active duty members and what they're looking for and what they need, and then what leadership is also willing to give, because time is not something that many people are willing to give within the military. So lots and lots of patience on my end, conversations as to what does your vision look like and what does mine look like, and how do we meet in the middle with some of this, and where's the give and take for that.
What I guess this has probably changed over the course of your career, but what level of command are you most often consulting with in terms of like how you're employed and who you're going to be working with? Because it seems like from the outside, like when I was in the Marine Corps, there really wasn't any strength and conditioning program yet. I think they had a couple hit boxes and that was about it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's definitely grown. But it seems like it kind of started at a fairly high level and then has been pushed down farther and farther down to the tactical level, yeah, company, platoon, squad level.
I'd say that also really depends on who you're working with. Now, Space Force and Air Force, I have a lot of more accessibility when it comes to being able to speak to commanders, working a lot with first shirts, and a lot of your senior enlisted, that there's more of a willingness to sit down and communicate. So these gentlemen, for the most part, want to sit down and have these conversations with you as to what are you doing, like why are we doing this, how are we going to get this accomplished, and show me the data. So they're a little more driven to communicate and work with us and find an understanding. Whereas I would say more so on the Marine Corps side, Army a bit, is a little more just get it done, figure it out, and having a sit down with leadership is going to be difficult, especially when you're working with, any kind of commanders. So that's
Is
definitely,
that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it just depends.
Yeah,
There's good and bad in it all. And that's where I think the background of being able to dabble in each branch has kind of given me some strengths where I
yeah,
know how
sure.
to adjust and pivot a little bit. Because like I said, no branch is doing things, I don't think, way better than others. They all have their setbacks. So as a coach, I prefer the method of like, hey, just get it done. Let's figure it out. Because that means that we're on the floor, we're doing some training, we're doing things like we're more physical, versus the let's have lots of emails, let's get all the data and the paperwork and the sheets crunched and information out to you, because they want to see the statistics on the opposite side. A little more data driven, a lot more research, which again, there's really good things to that forces me to really be knowledgeable in this field and understand how to communicate and prove like your worth as a coach. And your stats have to actually mean something versus like these numbers look good and they're increasing. It's like, yeah, well, what does that actually mean? I don't know. So there's good and bad to that, both in my growth and my progression, as well as what we're able to provide for our active duty members. And I think that's where I would say the tenacity and being able to just get things done for me feels more beneficial, because then I can directly start doing my job, which is serving those that are serving and making sure that they're taken care of, versus all of the speed bumps of trying to get the buy-in, trying to get the workarounds to make something like that happen.
What are the common threads of resistance if you've dealt with any of them? And I guess to go beyond that, like at what level is that resistance most common?
Uh, I mean, time, right? So the buzzword for the past couple of years in anything tactical is resiliency. Like, how do we become more resilient? What does that look like? And mental health and all these things, which is absolutely important. But I think the biggest pushback is we don't have time, right? The job needs to get done. Mission readiness, what is that? What does that look like? And so that's where, as coaches, and if you're on a human performance team, you really have to prove that, okay, I understand what's mission essential and what mission readiness is. But here are the ties that if we're not taking care of our people in the correct way, mission readiness is not going to happen, or it's not going to be nearly as effective. And that means taking out the fluff of like, oh, if I move better, I'm going to be better at work. I'm going to be in a better mood. Like, no, you need to prove that data and those statistics. And so you have to go a little bit deeper than that, because everything sounds great on paper, but Usually if you get the chance to have a true meeting with leadership, they want to like see some bulletproof stuff. So I'd say timing is really the biggest factor because no branch in the military has a consistent schedule. Nobody's working a 9 to 5. There's always different things that are occurring. You're going through trainings, you're seeing somebody for a week and then you don't see them for a month. They might pop in for a couple days and then they're gone. So it's how do you provide very efficient, very quick, and very dynamic styles of training or whatever that is that these people need, that their leadership or their squadron or whoever it is that they're working with is saying, yes, you can step away for a moment or we can push back. Like we won't start until 08 because we're training at 07 is going to be the most important thing. So I would say everything that we do is always based around timing and prioritization of that.
You mentioned data collection. I mean, it seems like a lot of these programs are often not up against a wall necessarily, but it's like there's been a trial period of sorts to a degree because it's so new. What data sets or data points are you pointing to, and how do you translate those to somebody who's not a strength and conditioning professional?
It's another great question. I think that depends on, and I hate that's always seems to be the answer, right? It depends. But right now, I think it depends on budgeting, on what you're able to do, what you're able to track, and really the population you're working with. Because there's some data that I am not allowed to collect, or if I do collect it, I cannot do much with it unless it's going to very specific people. And so I would say some of the populations I worked with within the Marine Corps, I had to be very cautious. Like I was not able just to hand out names, stats, and what they're doing and where we're even doing them. Whereas right now with the Space Force, we're dabbling a lot in some research, working with wearables, seeing what Guardians' day-to-day activities look like, what their stress levels are, and what reactions we're seeing on there. And we're testing a lot of these wearables on them, not only to see their day-to-day, but to see where kind of their health standards are, because we're dabbling with, do they even need to take a physical fitness test? Because if that's the case, like if we can prove that they are being healthy and they're hitting these wickets in comparison to those that are just taking the once a year physical fitness test, we're trying to see if that's even something that's needed. And if that's the case, can that spread to other branches? So, because we do have a lot of old school methods still within the military of, you take your physical fitness test, you get these scores. Yes, you are good. No, you are not good. And where's the range in that? So we're doing a lot of research. We're working right now with the Air Force Research Lab that's tied with us, gathering a lot of these numbers. Our job is to understand what these numbers are and really break it down in layman's terms for those that are not super savvy within this field. And it doesn't have to be super complex, right? We're looking at right now, because we're just getting into some of these movements with the Space Force, we're just looking at VO2 max stuff. Like, what does that information look like? Where's the averages? Where are the ranges? What's actually improving that and what isn't? And that can still be difficult to do because we have a lot of Guardians that work in skiffs that they are not allowed to wear their watches in or they need special approval. So there's a lot that goes into it. Whereas data-wise with the Navy, it necessarily a thing too much, at least within my position. So working with sailors for a short amount of time before they were, pushed back out to sea for 6, 8, 12 months, whatever that looks like. They'd come back for a certain time, get rid of their sea legs, and then they'd be back out again. So a lot of that was teaching and learning basic movement concepts, fundamentals that they need to be really good at their job. And a lot of it was just like fixing them, like posture wise, especially if these guys were taller. They're walking around in tight little ship hallways and then they're sleeping in the fetal position on their beds. So really just getting in basics and then just sitting off again. There was not much data that we could truly collect that meant anything because by the time they came back, it was hard to compare if they were better, worse, or the same because they almost always came back just different. So really a big portion of that role was just educating and trying to get them as fluid as they could be. And then with the Marines, there was some data. There was a lot of like, why does your program actually work? And so for us, it was understanding like the bare bones of coaching fundamentals. Like what percentages are we working with when we're doing conditioning? How do we actually measure this? Like, are we getting better or are we just working hard to work hard? And understanding why that matters. Because at that point in time, a lot of who we were working with really loved just seeing the grind. And that's kind of why, the HIT program was developed to introduce like purposeful training and to get away from just the old school, we're just going to grind it out or go for long runs. So we did a lot of work with the HIT program in developing that and That's, I think, where the term tactical athlete started to come around, which is great training people like athletes. I don't actually love that term because I don't think that we need to be measuring our active duty members as athletes because it's just different. And so we need to treat them differently in a very unique scenario. But that was really getting down to just like, what are your reps, sets, percentages? What's the volume and intensities we're working with? And why does this matter? And why do we need to plug and play this in the correct way? And so a lot of that started a lot of foundational courses. Like we are doing a train the trainer kind of build up. So we're not the only ones running around the base trying to fix and modify all these adaptations and new philosophies across a base. And so we were making Marines kind of extensions of us, and which really started to develop like the force fitness instructors course and bled into some other things. But for the Marine Corps at that time, it was very much bare bones of understanding just the basic concepts. Whereas now you're seeing a lot of these schoolhouses have human performance teams implemented, and they're doing some really cool research, especially when it comes to like load carries, seeing injury rates off of them and understanding what they're going through between schoolhouses. And they're really producing some cool data that I think is driving the Marine Corps to really invest and get better within this field.
I'm curious on the data collection you're working on now with the wearables. Anything surprising there? My experience with wearables, personally, in really small groups, is that it kind of usually tells you what you already know to a certain extent, but with a number tied to it. But I would imagine at scale, when you've got a couple hundred or however many numbers you're working with, you've got a better number there. Anything surprising?
Yeah, I think the surprising rate is it is if you're a part of this study, in my opinion, it is harder to have a higher fitness score or reading than it is if you were just to take a once a year fitness test. Because when we're looking at what your overall average VO2 is, so let's say your VO2 starts to drop, and we've got a scale as to where, right looks like depending on your age and all that. But if your VO2 isn't looking good, then, and that for a lot of people, I think our guardians are very surprised at how hard it is to get your VO2 to an acceptable rate. And it's not because our standards are super high, it's just because they don't understand intensities as to what conditioning could look like. I went for an easy jog and I run 3 or 4 times a day, or excuse me, a week. And, I run a mile and a half, 2 miles, 3 miles, whatever that is. But it's like, yeah, if your intensity never changes and you're just kind of trotting around, your VO2 is not looking good because we're not training our heart in all the different capacities that it could be. So, like, let's talk about that. So people are finding like, yeah, I'm in decent shape. I do the basics and like I'm fit when it comes to like your general population. We're like, yeah, you're not the general population, so that doesn't make the cut. So we're finding, I think the surprising rates are people are like, oh, my VO2 is not where I thought it was. And I thought I was in like decent shape. But according to my wearable and the standards, we're not hitting it. So it's actually easier, in my opinion, like I said, for guardians just to do a test once a year because they're going to get better scoring rates than they would if if their wearable is telling them otherwise. So that was interesting, but to me that forces some awareness as to like, hey, you going for a moderate brisk run, like we're better than that. Like we can be doing so much more than that. But and I'm a little biased in that obviously, but so I think that's surprising. I'm really hit and miss with the wearables because, like you said, there's information like, yeah, I kind of already do this. Like, yeah, I know I sleep like trash. I know I don't get enough. Great. My hesitation in a lot of that is people love to see like, oh, today's a red day for me, or my stress levels are here, my body battery is showing me this, like I shouldn't train today, versus like, well, how do you actually feel? And if these people are like, hey, I feel great, but my body battery says I'm at like a 30%. Like if you feel good, get after it. I'm all for that. Read your body and understand it versus just reading a wearable that's telling you certain information, because there's also going to be days that your body battery might seem super high, or your sleep rate said it's great and you still feel like trash. So I think it takes a little bit of that self-responsibility and scanning and actually understanding your system. I would say guardians for the most part are very like tech driven. They want to know everything about their wearable. They want to know about all of the things and understand the why. But I think it's very natural for them to rely so heavily on the wearables at this point, and it can get a little, they can get in their heads about it. It takes away, I think, some of the opportunities for me as a coach to like have those one-on-one conversations and to be like, hey, these are things that we can do for ourselves versus relying on technology to spit us out an answer.
So it's almost like it can be a amazing feedback mechanism for the individual, but can also be a crutch to some degree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So, and it really depends on how you address it. I think too, like on the flip side, it also offers the opportunity for me to have those conversations with people and be like, all right, what's going on with your watch? What are we seeing? What are we doing here? Okay. What's the wearable of your choice? Why are we picking that? And it causes to ask some more questions. And I think force them to kind of recognize what they've committed to, and what they're actually willing to gain out of it. Because a lot of times they just wear stuff because they see somebody else wearing it and they're like, this is kind of cool, whatever, but I've never paid attention to it. So, it's good and bad, but it really forces, I think it forces myself to get out and have those conversations to make sure they actually know what they've committed to and, you know, take some responsibility in those actions.
Do you see any difference? It sounds like there's some ongoing discussions in terms of, whether you use this as a constant fitness level metric or using kind of the standard once a year, twice a year fitness test. Do you see anything there in terms of, does one kick somebody in the butt a little bit better as a reminder of, where they need to be or in order to prepare because they have promotional scores tied to fitness tests and stuff like that?
Yeah, I do think these wearables, at least the standards that we've created thus far because you have to have what we're looking at is a VO2 rating, as well as you need to have a certain amount of activity, decent intensities. So we're tracking how much time they're actually training within a month. And so they have to hit some different wickets in that in order for them to stay within this study and for us to continue to get data. So if you're that person that turns your wearable on like twice a month, like, sorry, you're not making the cut for us. Like, you're just providing invalid data. So I think with the wearables, it gives some pretty raw information to these people of like what I thought hard or like decent training is not. And that's their kick in the butt because we're introducing very different concepts of we're getting out of you can just do some basic calisthenics and go for an easy walk or jog, around the park. It's a big eye-opening process. The only issue I see with that eye-opening process is it's putting people a little bit into a panic because there's right now for like my role, there's only one of me and I cover two different bases within the area. So when you're working with, decent amount of guardians and everybody's in panic mode and they're sending emails like, what's going on? My device can't work. I'm like, no, it's because we're not working. It's it really creates a like sense of we need to educate, we need to really instill some responsibility in this, but we can't do that or have these expectations if we don't lay that out ahead of time. And I think that's where we dropped the ball the most right now with this program is we didn't thoroughly educate well enough in the very beginning. And now we're kind of chasing our tails, trying to get guardians to pay attention more. So like, here's why your ratings are here. Here's why you're getting flagged for possibly getting dropped from the study because this is what our expectations are. But again, that also puts it back on the guardian. They don't have to stay in the study. So if they want to pull out, they can. And most of them are staying in and they're like, okay, let me see how I can do this. So it's been interesting to see the
That's
reactions to a
interesting.
lot of this.
Yeah. So in terms of, I guess, your day-to-day or week-to-week flow, you said you're the only strength and conditioning staff for two bases. So you got a lot of guardians under
A
your
decent
care,
amount.
essentially.
Yeah, there's our area here in Florida. We don't have like hundreds and hundreds of guardians, but we definitely have a decent amount. And then there's still a very heavy Air Force population here. So bouncing between Patrick as well as Cape Canaveral. So Cape Canaveral, we have crazy high launch schedule when it comes to our rockets. So we have heavy presence of guardians there. We definitely need the Air Force. I mean, Air Force is always going to have to support Space Force and vice versa with a lot of this a lot of the mission. So seeing a mix of both people, but yeah, it's a couple hundred people that we're overseeing consistently and looking at. So it's a lot. It keeps me busy, which I enjoy. But when it comes to truly getting meaningful data and being able to present it in a way that is going to continue to progress is still a mystery that we're working on over here.
Yeah. So how are you planning, building, and employing the actual strength and conditioning component of it with that many personnel and pretty small staff?
Well, I have a fantastic physical therapist here that I work with, and her background is also in strength conditioning, and so her and I have tried to create programs where we are constantly co-coaching. So no matter if you're on profile, if you've got injuries, if you're perfectly healthy, right? You can see we tag team every single session that we're doing, and her and I are cranking through stuff. We keep our sessions fairly small because if we expand and try to target everybody, at that point, we're not coaching anymore. We are just running a giant training session. People aren't getting feedback. They're not getting cued. They might not be getting any kind of attention that they truly need. And we want to honor the fact that each person deserves it.
Are you working? So you're working with both, sounds like both individuals and then probably smaller groups.
Yeah, and I'd say for the most part, I'm working with groups because I'll see squadrons or flights coming through at a time. So I had the opportunity. We were very, very fortunate to have a decent budget, and so collaborating with the FSS squadron here and being able to actually take a huge amount of space of their current fitness center, and being able to kind of dedicate that to what our training looks like has been fantastic, because another huge issue on bases is finding space. You can't just build a building or take over somewhere. There's abandoned warehouses everywhere, but for whatever reason you can never take those, right? So we were able to have a pretty decent training space where we're having up to 40 people come in. We're tackling that and really trying to stay on top of what progression looks like and actually making these training sessions and series versus like, here's your random workout of the day. So that's been a great start because I've just hit my year here. And so we're still, working through the weeds and trying to get a lot of that culture and that shift when it comes to just performance and training in general. So a lot of our guardians, have not been exposed to a lot of this, especially guardians that went through, let's say, boot camp during COVID, or they went through, their basic training series during COVID. They weren't doing a lot of training. They weren't doing a lot of hands-on stuff. So for, I would say almost 80% of the guardians that I'm seeing, this is their first time ever being exposed to equipment or training styles like this. So doing it in groups has been, in my opinion, that's really, I don't want to say the only way, but that's the preferred way for me, because there's so much culture and camaraderie that you can build and develop within small groups that takes them back to their unit, to their squadron, whatever that is. Beautiful conversations happen during a training session, whether that's between a coach and the person or the people that they're working with. There's also really bad conversations and things come out, right? But that's all good. Like, to me, that's the atmosphere that we want to build, and that's that culture shift that we want to have, that's a very trusted space and environment, and that they feel like they can trust me to take them forward and push them in areas that they're maybe not super comfortable with, and seeing what we can expose and seeing where we can go from there. And that, that builds into communication tactics, leadership skills, and just relationships as a whole. And so while we're not training, maybe like we're not hitting the mark with training every single person as much as I'd like to right now, to me, building that foundation of the culture, because there just isn't a culture around training right now, and with the Guardians, at least where I am. So if we can build that good foundation as to what this could look like, trusting yourself in the process, trusting others, and then being able to take that into your workforce, like, to me, that's what building optimal like mission readiness is. So we can expose a lot of these other skills and characteristics within the individual and within this small group, just in something as simple as a good training session that will lead and build into what their workplace environment looks like, or some of the skill sets that are going to be exposed out there.
So because you're not able to see these folks as frequently as you'd like, you're providing them some variety of programming that they're expected to do on their own?
Yes and no. So I try to steer away from every person is getting this individualized program, because I would just be chasing my tail all day on that, because everybody wants the program, right? Everybody wants to create the perfect diet plan and all these other things, and then they'll never touch them. But we do have access to creating or to having an app. And so we can have structured programs on there to where, yes, we'll have, let's say, 4 or 5 different areas like PFA development. We're looking at, building overall foundational strength, whatever that is. And then we have the abilities to see the certain people that are in each one and make those small modifications or adjustments for them. Because I also don't agree that here's 4 programs, figure out which one's going to work for you. Because that's not the approach that we should take, right?
Sure.
So yes, they're seeing us typically on average right now, twice a week, which, we can't expect significant improvements just seeing something twice a week, but we focus on kind of the core foundations or what we're truly trying to develop in those 2 days. And then the rest of the training that we're trying to offer that they can be doing on their own, or they can be seeing, me off to the side when we're doing, during some of those down hours, or if they're stopping by at lunch or whatever, we can start to kind of tweak and adapt some of those other things that they're doing throughout the rest of the week.
Well, that's so
And we
interesting.
kind of have, we kind of make, we make our guardians almost earn that because again, everybody wants to program, everybody wants to be on the app, and that costs money for somebody, which is us right now. So if I'm going to be having all these slots that we're paying for to have you there, then we got to have a little bit of buy-in from you. So our requirements are you're coming to a training session consistently with us and you're seeing us. So we're able to touch base with where we're at, but you're also doing, just an overall like movement assessment. So I can see exactly how I should program for you or adaptations we can make because I can see like what you're actually capable of doing. And then making sure that they're actually training off and on the app. So I can see how many times they've touched in on it and how many workouts they've actually completed and what that looks like. So if they're coming in and checking in and out in 5 minutes, like you're not actually training, right? So we have some areas to where like I'm going to hold you accountable for this because yes, I want to work with everybody, but at the same time, like we need to value each other's role and position. So there's almost a little bit of buy-in or like, hey, you meet me halfway, and here's where we're gonna take this. And that's how we can kind of control some of the chaos of everybody trying to tap in and get a program or try to advance or do something when there's only one of me at the moment.
Is the accountability coming from? It's obviously coming from you, but is it also coming from the various organization command structure, or is that not really a priority for Space Force at large?
I'd say it's 50-50.
Yeah.
So it the to me the opening steps are where we see like yes, this person's gonna get after it and I'm not gonna have an issue with you. Um, Versus not. So the second that someone hears, oh, I have to do a movement assessment, like, hey man, it can take you 20 minutes tops. Like we can crank through this. Um, Movement assessment and that you have to come to our training sessions, like and show face from time to time. Um, that exposes people very, very quickly. The ones that actually are like, yep, I'm all in for this because I am here to get better versus those that are like, sorry, I just tried to get something for free out of you. I haven't seen anybody that's been on the fence of like, I don't know if I want to do this and actually follow through with it. If people are on the fence, they usually just go the opposite direction. And that's fine. I don't take that personally, but again, it's to me, if you want a good product and you have those expectations, like you have to set the tone from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so, and that to me again it shows the importance behind what we're producing versus, hey, I've got 5 random programs. Yeah, we'll just put you on one, whatever. Like to me, that's not valuing the individual, their person. I'm not trying to meet them where they are in this moment. I'm just giving them something and never thinking about them again. And they're going to treat my program or treat my training the same way. So, lead with caring and lead that with like, hey, this is actually meaningful to me. And I want this to be really meaningful for you as well. And I want to instill the importance of what overall like health and wellness is. Because if we're trying to get rid of, which I shouldn't say that we're trying to get rid of, but if we're dabbling with you don't have to take a test once a year or twice a year. And if you're just pushing for overall health and wellness, so we don't have to do this, like that's another way to instill that is that you have to prioritize you and understand what that looks like. Because if I have to constantly hold your hand through it and have to give you all these things and check in with you all the time, like to me, I'm just carrying you along the way versus you taking any kind of effort or extremes to actually get better for yourself. And I'm not doing my job at that point. Because I always preach like the most beautiful moment as a coach is when your athlete or your client says, Coach, I don't need you anymore because I know how to do this or I've gotten there,
Right.
and that comes with a sense of educating you, I'm empowering you. Like I want you to do these things for yourself. You shouldn't need me. Terrible sales pitch if you're trying to have a bunch of clients, but like that's the overall goal and intent for me is if they know how to take care of themselves and they're in a really good spot, like I've done my job.
What's your movement screener look like?
So it's super, super basic right now. We'll do like a lower back endurance test for them on one of our GHDs. We'll look at some ankle mobility
Just
and
a
kind of
isometric
see.
hold.
Yep, yep. We'll do some ankle mobility. We'll look at some single leg hops for them. And that's just to make sure they can absorb, obviously, force. Like if they can't be doing that, they probably shouldn't be running. And usually that's a big exposure is like, what do you mean I can't run if I can't hop? I'm like, well, let's look at the force that's going through a single leg and transferring that. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. We'll do some shoulder movements just to see how their scapulas and stuff like that are working and what that range of motion looks like. Um, and then I'm trying to think. I haven't done one in a little while, so now you're making me think on this a little bit.
So you're really focusing on quality of movement unloaded,
Hmm.
kind of just
Yep.
joint range of motion and some basic
Yeah.
strength tests.
Yeah, very, very basic stuff. We'll do an overhead squat motion with them as well. I'm not a huge fan of the FMS. I think it takes forever. And I think that there's a lot of portions of that that I would personally, I just wouldn't use ever again. Like, cool, that's great that we have these numbers, but like, I'm not going to do anything with them. Or I can find these a lot more efficiently with a lot less stress on the person. So yeah, a lot of it is just going through basic movement patterns, making sure there's no pain and what that range is, and then getting into, yeah, just like basic, motions, isometric holds, or whatever that is. And that to me sets us up for the absolute basics of where we can go starting anything with them, or what if they do end up joining in on one of their larger group training sessions. Like, I'm already prepared to know where we might modify for you, what angles we're going to have to stick with some of the movement patterns. So it's not
That's interesting.
sexy.
That's a
It doesn't look
challenging
great
group
at the
of,
moment,
say,
but it's quick, down and dirty.
yeah, it's interesting. I would imagine that's pretty challenging to implement some of those adjustments in a group of 30 or 40 to a
It
degree, right?
can be. It
Yeah.
can be. To me, that's I'm a big believer. I mean, military, right? If you're 15 minutes early or late. So in that time frame before a training session starts, people are moving, people are chatting. My job as a coach is to float and have some sort of conversation with every single person. Whether that's, seeing if their mentality is okay for the day, like if they just look mad at the world, like, okay, we might have to shift some things, or that person's going to get after it today. And then looking at when they're warming up, basic movement patterns, like, ooh, this guy's got a little bit of limp, or he's really stiff, or whatever that is. But that's just planning, right? 3 steps ahead, 3 steps backwards. Like, I should be able to have some modification or adaptation to every single movement. If I don't, then I haven't done my job. So anytime I structure something, typically I'll have 3 different, I don't necessarily like to say regression because it has such a negative way about it, but I have 3 ways that we can maybe pull back a little bit, reassess, and then 3 areas that we can push forward if somebody's like, coach, this is too easy, right? Or if they just need to be like mentally challenged in a different way to feel like they're working harder and maybe they're not, and you just kind of trick them into that. So that's usually how I'll lead with that in such a big training session. And you're not going to catch every single person, right? But that's where, like I said, when the physical therapist I work with is around, like, she's got such a good coaching eye as well. And her physical therapist eye is very different than mine. So for her and I to be able to tag team these sessions is awesome.
Yeah. So, in terms of just kind of a needs analysis breakdown, I mean, you've worked with pretty wide variety of military types, I guess, within the branches, and then the sub MOSs within that. What's the goal with the Space Force? Because I would imagine that it's not necessarily you're not throwing a 120-pound ruck on and walking for a long ways and then doing a bunch of fire maneuver stuff. How does it work?
I don't think the Space Force has quite figured that out yet. And that's another reason why so many of our teams have kind of been scattered and established around these Space Force bases. Right now, Space Force is completely pulled from the Air Force, right? So their physical fitness test is the exact same. Standards and all that stuff are the exact same. So the question is, okay, like, why are we pulling from the Air Force when we do very different things than airmen? They're similar roles in a lot of areas, but why would we just piggyback off of them when we could be doing our own thing? So that is truly what we are trying to figure out right now, is what does right look like? And it's cool that Space Force they're new, so they have the availability to do this, but they are taking their time to figure out what right is. Whereas other branches are just like, nope, this is what we've always done. This is what works. And it's not that there's no philosophy or method to their madness, but Space Force has the blessing of being so new and having a decent budget to be able to hire people and figure out, okay, what do these guys need and why? And so we're able to do some research on this. So I think that we're still trying to figure out what those needs actually are and if they matter at all.
That's interesting. So you're ground level setting this thing up, really.
And that's truly what brought me down here outside of being able to live on the beach. I was in, like I said, Arkansas before this, and being in a landlocked state was not going over well for me. So obviously great location, but there aren't many times that you can work within the DoD or just the military population and have an opportunity to instill change within policy, within anything. So knowing, yes, this is not going to be a quick shift, the opportunity to be like, okay, maybe have a say or an influence on what could look better, because we know in the past so many of our physical fitness tests and strategies have just not gone super well. I mean, the Army right now is in the middle of changing and, revamping everything, which is really cool to see. It's frustrating because we don't have an answer yet as to exactly what they're doing, or things are always shifting and sliding. And, you still have people that are really upset because the leg tucks and stuff went away and bring it back, whatever. But like, at least people are talking about it. At least like that means this matters. So to be brought on to ask these questions and kind of prove why your method works, one, was very flattering that I was even considered to have this type of role, but to be able to have a possible impact as to what right could look like or have a better future for these guys longevity wise is really cool.
Interesting. Kind of wanted to shift a little bit to what I guess the future of tactical strength conditioning looks like. Are you a DoD employee or are you through a contracted company?
I am duty. Yep.
And you've probably done both, I would imagine.
I have, yes. Most of my career has been duty, but very, very short stints in contracting here and there sprinkled in.
Is there a big difference in terms of just your own professional development and career horizons? Is there a big difference in those two?
There can be. Contracts are all set up so differently, right? So what your funding looks like and honestly how you're able to negotiate your contract really matters. So while your pay in contracting might not look great, what you're able to negotiate in when it comes to benefits, time off, continued education rates, travel, stuff like that, they can really make up for. Or vice versa. Like you might have an excellent paycheck and you're like, holy cow, I'd never make this within the duty. But it might be a little more restricted as to what that flexibility looks like. And there's always the risk of, okay, I hope, when my contract is up in 5, 10 years or whatever, either the same contract wins this bid and I stick around, or if a new contract comes through, they keep me on. So there's a little bit of risk in that. Although, I mean, this year you'd think working within the DoD is a safe bet. You're not going to lose your job because it's impossible to get fired. Well, this year with all the huge shifts and cuts that they've made with federal employees has been drastic. So in the beginning of this year, I mean, it was very nerve-wracking to be a part of a brand new program that when we're seeing the government is cutting programs left and right. So January, February was pretty stressful for your
Sure.
civilians working on base because you're like, I don't know if we're going to make it. So when it comes to stuff like security wise, job security, there's some differences there. Roles and like what's needed is a little bit different. Sometimes your DoD roles require a little more paperwork when it comes to like day-to-day actions or other things that you might have to be involved with. Contracting, they have their own rules and policies. A lot of times it's like, hey, just give me a recap as to what you touched on this week. Give me some stats as to where we're at. Whereas duty stuff can be a little more hands-on sometimes with that as to what that needs to look like. And your chain of command obviously looks a little bit different. Contracting, you have, your company and those that you work with, and you're working with some leadership, whereas duty, you're reporting to both civilian and active duty leadership there and constantly playing with, new heads that are coming through and adjustments and changes that are coming through there. So
Is there a direction it's headed in terms of, hey, we've got X amount of boat spaces and we're going to make these DoD salaried employees, or kind of leaning more towards the contracted company approach?
that's a great, great question for this current time frame. There have been, so with the DRP opportunities right now for people to take either early retirement or anything like that due to all of the budget shifts across the government, there have been a lot of rumors and people feeling like your human performance teams that civilians are a part of within the DoD are going to be shifting and going away. And so a lot of people jumped ship and did the deferred plan because they felt that a contract is going to be a safer route. Now you'll talk to other people that feel like, nope, their DoD stuff is going to stick around. These human performance teams are going to be fine, and you're going to see some limited contracts. So that's an interesting question because that's a huge topic of debate right now as to what's actually going to happen. There is a big push for your active duty to start filling in the roles of civilians. So we have active duty physical therapists. They should be stepping into these roles. Why would we hire civilians? It makes sense on paper, but we see that your active duty physical therapists are pulled in 1,000 different directions as well. So they're also a part of the military. And so there's roles and needs for that. And then, if you're coming into active duty, typically it's a secondary MOS at, duty if you are leading. And even if it's just PT sessions, or anything like that. So you're finding that the quality, obviously, of work is not quite where it was if you had somebody else in that role that's their full-time position. But again, that's where we have to find ways to defend our role as to like, are we actually creating valid data, and does my job truly matter, or does it just sound really good on paper?
So you almost have to, as a group, lobby a little bit for your role.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
there's been a lot of human performance teams over the past decade that have just not made it. Especially when you kind of look in the soft world, there's a lot of great, again, look great on paper, and the teams were crushing it. They were doing great things, but they couldn't provide valid data that like, yes, I actually prevented injuries, or yes, these people got better and this deployment rate was more successful because of us, which is a really difficult, or it can be a very difficult thing to prove. But we have seen many, many of those programs appear for a couple of years and then they're gone. And maybe a new contracting company comes out and they kind of reframe it, they rename it or whatever. But there's been a lot of those shifts over the years because we haven't quite found exactly what right looks like, or it's not what's right for that specific population.
Where do you see it going? Generally, not necessarily between DoD and contracted companies, but I guess just the greater tactical strength and conditioning as a whole, next 5, 10 years. It seems like a lot of stuff's probably in flux right now, but
It is. I mean, I think I'm biased in this answer, but I think it's an absolute necessity. There's so much more to it, right, than just like creating a fun workout plan. And when you start to dive into just the methods and the philosophies behind it and what could be instilled is incredibly beneficial. But I think what right looks like is very, very difficult to prove and to show. I don't think it's going away. I think we might see some initial cutbacks. And I think honestly, it depends on kind of where we're at. When a war is going on, a lot of coaches and physical therapists are hired. And that's not saying that we look for that, because that's never necessarily um, a state that we want to be in. But that's what keeps people fired up, and that's what keeps morale high, and that's what keeps that tenacity going within our military branches. We've seen a huge shift when it comes to optimal readiness and what like drives people when it comes to just the physical training side of things, because we haven't had a need for it across all your branches, affecting kind of your general population within the military. So I think when we're seeing some of these like coaches that are, we have all these human performance teams, and it's like, yeah, like, but what are we really doing? Why can't these guys just do it on their own? And that's because there hasn't been a lot of shakeup. Not that we hope for that, like I said, but it shifts the dynamic, it shifts the priority across all the branches. And I think everybody feels that for sure.
is the urgency on it related to kind of the transition between the GWAT and relative peacetime now? Is that
Yeah.
more budgetary, or is that more command feels that it's a higher necessity, or maybe a combination?
I don't think it's necessarily budget. I mean, there's been shifts, but it's never been so drastic to where I'm like, oh, we're just not making ends meet, or, jobs are just going to completely go away because of this. I think it does come with just prioritizing what the needs are, because the day to day has shifted. We don't have people deploying nearly as much, and the deployments look and feel very different. So the requirements beforehand, you know, when I was in Lejeune, we'd have an entire, group come over to us and they're like, hey, we're deploying in 6 to 8 months. Here's where we're at. Here's where we're going. Get us ready. And like, it was, it could have been a year out, which was awesome. So we had all that time. Whereas now, oh yeah, I'm deploying in a month, and there's not much going on within that deployment. They're just kind of supporting it or whatever. And it's a different feel. The needs and the prioritization, especially when it comes to commanders, is very, very different in what prepping for that looks like. Just because again, we're not quite in that in any kind of heightened tones for the most part, right? And again, I'm talking very like just general military population right now.
It's interesting. I'll be really curious to see how it evolves, because it's just so new. It's been in flux, and it's always like a fight, right, to prove your relevancy, even though it seems like such an intuitive thing for the military generally, especially for your combat arms guys and stuff like that. It's just an inherently physical job. So I'll be curious to kind of track it, and it definitely seems like there's some progress being made, though, I think.
I would agree. I think that it's forcing us to get smarter. right? We can't just have dummy coaches that are loud and aggressive and love throwing weights around. Those guys don't last anymore because one, that's maybe not what the population wants or needs. There are, you have your power lifters, you've got your guys that love doing that kind of stuff, which is great. But we can't have that approach across the board. And I think that's still the stigma a lot of strength coaches are trying to get away from. Because initially, before tactical strength conditioning was a thing, we just pulled in collegiate coaches and they were just running things like a high, quality collegiate weight room for athletes. And it just wasn't quite what these guys needed. So I think it's forcing us to get smarter in what we're doing, which is great. And then I think that right now, because there's such a heavy push on health and wellness, sounds super fluffy and lame and boring, but I think it's how do we actually take care of our people and create some sort of longevity? We know that the equipment these guys are wearing, their uniforms are not what's ideal for them, especially when we're looking at like boots have come a long way, but when we look at what gear they're in all of the time, we know that this is naturally going to have an effect, which is why when people are retiring, their injury rates are through the roof, right? And their disability percentages are crazy. But I think that the biggest push right now is how do we increase a better longevity or make this even a thing, because that did not exist and that was not prioritized in the past. So yes, we want to get these people bigger, faster, stronger in all of the ways, but we also need their bodies just to move well. Because, if you hit 30 and you're still in the military, it's like, oh, you're guaranteed to have a bad back and bad knees and bad shoulders. It's like, well, that
Sure.
probably shouldn't be the case. And like, yeah, we can laugh about it a little bit, but when it's a reality and you can't do anything with your kids and you're gone from your kids all the time and all this stuff starts to add up, like you're wondering why you joined to begin with and if the risk is worth it. So I think what the future truly looks like is bettering this population while we have the time to do it. And we can't forget that that is still such a huge priority. And we don't have these long stints of like subtleness often. So when we do, I think as coaches, we need to remember like this is when we need to make the people the most efficient and feeling the best, both mentally and physically, as we possibly can. Get them checking in on themselves, get them to medical if they need it, take care of those profiles, and get people fixed while we can. Because again, these opportunities don't come that often, and when they're not here anymore, like it's game time, and we're not going to have a lot of time to prioritize this. So it's a boring motive to have. It's not exciting necessarily for us as coaches, and I'm sure it doesn't feel super exciting for these guys either. But like I said, it's a rare opportunity that we get to take advantage of.
Sure. All right, so let's rewind like 10 or 15 years, and a younger Catherine is just getting interested in tactical strength conditioning. What would you tell your younger self as you're entering this career field?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think I would tell myself that it's okay to show that you care. I made the mistake early on of one, there were not very many female coaches in this world, let alone in tactical. So to get buy-in and to feel like I earned a spot within this population, which I don't even like to use that term, earn a spot, but to feel trusted within that spot, I was very like stoic, very much like we're going to train, we're going to be overly professional all of the time, because I never wanted to be questioned as to what like my intentions were or like why I was there to begin with. So I took that to heart, but I didn't show as a coach that I cared about each individual. So, because I just, like I said, stoic, always, business. And so I think that I would tell myself, like, it's very okay to care and show that, because that's why people come back to you as a coach. They want to know, like, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Leading with that philosophy, and that doesn't mean that you're this crazy emotional person, but it's okay to have connection and to show that, like, yes, this is a process. We're building trust. We're having these tough conversations. And there's still some really beautiful things that can still happen in a very professional world. So finding that balance and just being a human, I was almost robotic in everything I did. And it's like, you can express and have a bad day. You can have a great day. You can show just emotion in general, and it's going to be fine. People are going to want that because they're seeking that from you to begin with. Like, you want to connect with your coach and you want to have that sort of relationship. And I just was completely blocking all that out. So, and then I think took a lot of just trusting myself that, like, yes, you can be here. And yes, like, what you're doing as a coach. Open up and get to know these people because they want to know you as well. And like, no one's ever going to trust you if you don't do that. So.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. What's your biggest coaching mistake? Single experience.
I think two things come to mind is assuming that I know what's best for you, because who am I to ever tell you what you should or shouldn't do, right? I have never been in the military. I have never served. So me thinking that I understand your lifestyle is a mistake, right? I can go through the motions, I can get small glimpses of it, but that doesn't mean that I'm ever in those shoes. So when it comes to you should train like this, and this, I think that is wrong of me to say. I think that you need to make suggestions. You need to meet the person where they're at. And if as a coach, I can't find other routes or methods to that, I have not done my job and I'm not being a very good coach. On the flip side of that, though, I think a big mistake that I still battle is the confidence that I do understand parts and pieces of their role and that I do have knowledge to be able to provide something worthwhile to these people. So while yes, I can't necessarily, or I shouldn't be telling you what you should or shouldn't do, I need to have the confidence in myself to say, well, like, yeah, I've never been in your shoes and no, I have not served, but I'm also here for a reason. And my information and my abilities as a coach is valid. So let's find a way to make this work and let's find a way to get you better.
List your top five favorite movements. If you had to
Ooh.
pick your top five for the rest of your life to do, not necessarily just lifting, could be any valid human movements. What would you stick with?
Hinging and squatting, big time favorites. And that's just because I like to lift in those fashions. So if we're talking those, yep, I lift and or excuse me, squat and hinge are incredible. That's what you're doing every day and all of the things. So get really good at those in all different directions. I think there is a lot of beauty in moving swiftly. And when I think of that, I think of like just opening up strides. So at all points in life, like we should be able to move freely and quickly because life doesn't necessarily happen slowly for us. And so always being prepared for that. I also ran track in college, so I think I'm a little biased in that answer. I think I know this is kind of a vague answer, but just being able to get up off the floor in different ways, whether that's like in a prone position or whatever, like it doesn't matter. Just being able to get up efficiently from whatever position you're in on the floor, efficiently and effectively and pain free. And that can be really difficult. I'm trying to think. My last one, I got to make this one a good one. I'm going to say probably and any kind of a vertical pull is really big for me. Like you have people that can do pull-ups and people that can't. And to me, a pull-up is such a huge shout out to me as a coach as to either where you're lacking, whether that's in basic movement. Like if you can't do a proper pull-up because your scaps aren't moving in the right way, there's a lot of other things that you can't do. Or if we're not strong enough to move our own body weight in that vertical position and control on the way back down, that to me as a coach screams so many different alerts or areas that we can work on. Whereas if you are moving super fluidly through that, like I know that you're taking care of yourself, different directions, your scapulas are moving well, and your lats to me are one of the most important muscles in the body. Like if we can't run well, huge reason for that is because our lats aren't working well, or they're tight, or they're not, super strong. And we have a lot of running issues based off of lats. And so to me, I think a vertical pull motion is a huge alert as a coach, but it also determines like just overall strength and wellness within a person and movement mechanics.
And last question for me: what would be your favorite or book you would recommend most to other coaches, strength conditioning focused?
That's a tough one. I think it depends on where you're at in life as a coach. I know in the beginning I was just being like super boring and reading all the books on just like science and getting better at programming. And after a couple of those, you get burnt out really quickly. Trying to think of some. I read a lot now on just like overall character development, leadership. Leaders Eat Last is always a great one. I think it forces you to reflect in a lot of areas. I'm trying to think. I love the book, and it's a little bit more Christian based, and it's actually a book typically made for men. But I love Wild at Heart. I think even as a female reading that, there's a lot of lessons learned as to like what push and pulls when it comes to roles and responsibilities in life looks like, and how leadership shifts, or just relationships in general between people shift. I think for myself as a coach now, like I'm still, you can always learn and progress, especially when it comes to the science. But for me, it's a lot on just character development, how you communicate, and finding what matters to you and living through like a value system. Because I think as a coach, you display that very, very quickly. And people that come through your door know your expectations and know your value system very quickly. And I think that's incredibly important to lead with. because people won't start to question a lot of things that maybe with a coach that they or somebody that's influential in their life that they might be guessing. And that's going to limit trust, communication, and where growth happens. The best coaches in the world for me are not the ones that created the best programs. It's the people that were able to mentor and guide me in those processes. So I like to read a lot of those styles of books just to make sure that I'm centered and that I'm portraying what I feel should be portrayed or what I claim to portray. So those are two that I like a lot.
That's interesting. I went to a mountain bike coaching clinic as being coached this past weekend. It was a 2-day deal, and the guy who was coaching it was phenomenal. Just somebody who's obviously done a lot of work in terms of learning how to communicate the basic skills and how to read body language and all that kind of stuff. And it was, I just hadn't seen that in a while outside of the weight room, which was, it was just nice thing to see somebody who's really a student of the art. And certainly there's an art to it for sure.
Yeah, it's again, when I think of some of the best coaches I've ever had, they're usually not like these science driven guys. They're not strength coaches at all. They're just like random coaches that I've had on small things that have had these weird impacts and like wiggled their way into my life. I don't know, like this guy's kind of off his rocker or this guy's a little crazy, but what he says like means something to me. And that's what matters. Or they see something in me that I don't see in myself, or they're pushing me or causing my gears to turn in general. And to me, if you're a coach that can make others feel that way and get them to think and get them to explore on their own, like that's a good coach. I shouldn't be telling you what to do. I should be guiding you through your own journey and your process. Because we hear the word coach a lot, and I think people automatically think like sports and, strength conditioning, whatever that is. But a coach is anybody that is in your life that can mentor and make an impact. I can be a friend, a parent, random guy down the street. So like to me, the title coach, yes, is very meaningful, but it's not this like heavy title that we have to carry around or earn. It's if you are making a positive or influential impact on something, you're a coach. So take advantage of that or be careful not to take advantage. And like you're always inspiring people whether you know it or not. And so being mindful of that, respecting it and honoring it is huge. And I really love trying to lead with that kind of mentality for others.
I think that's a great place to end. Anything else you wanted
Yeah.
to add, Catherine?
No, just excited to be on here and chat with you, Charlie. And yeah, hopefully the listeners enjoyed it. So
Lost you there for a sec. We're good. Cool. All right, cool. Well, I think I'll
there
end
we
it
go.
there. Yeah. I think we lost connection for a second, but all good. That was great. I appreciate the time, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you so much, Charlie. So great questions. Made me think a little bit, so that's always good. And yeah, no, loved being on here.
Good. All right. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, have a good one.